Welcome back. With just 5 days until a government shutdown, House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled a plan on Saturday which will likely depend on Democratic support to pass. The bill would extend government funding for a number of federal programs without spending cuts, including veterans and military construction programs through mid-January and for others through early February. It omits any funding for Israel or Ukraine. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre panned it as a recipe for more Republican chaos and more shutdowns, full stop. But the real test will be in the Senate. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy, a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, joins me now. Senator Murphy, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
So let's start right there with this bill. This is a two-tiered bill put forward by the newly installed House Speaker Mike Johnson. Will you support it?
So, first of all, this is no way to run a railroad. We shouldn't be in the position of having to pass multiple continuing resolutions. And in the Senate, we've been able to find bipartisan agreement on a budget that not only funds what the country needs, but gets money to our partners all around the world who are in desperate need of American support. Listen, we cannot have a government shutdown this weekend. Certainly not while we are facing these existential crises for our friends in Israel and Ukraine. I don't like this laddered CR approach. It looks gimmicky to me, but I'm open to what the House is talking about. The priority has to be keeping the government open, and I think this is a moment where reasonable people in the Senate, and that's where most of the reasonable people are these days, have to make sure that we are not making the perfect the enemy of the good. I don't like what the House is talking about, but I'm willing to listen. I
hear you saying you're not a yes yet, but you're not a no. What do you need to get to yes on this piece of legislation?
Well, we are going to proceed in the Senate on a clean CR without gimmicks, without ladders. It does worry me that the House process requires you to come back and deal with half the budget on one date and half the budget on another date. That sounds to me a little bit of a recipe for failure. But I'm willing to listen to the case that they're making. I would much rather do what the Senate is doing, just pass a CR that keeps the entire government open to the same date.
Very quickly, before we move on, does this bill make it more or less likely that there will be a shutdown?
Well, listen, I don't think anybody can predict what happens in the House of Representatives today. That place is a political dumpster fire right now. And until we get reasonable, thoughtful leadership that prioritizes bipartisan cooperation in the House, every single day is going to be a bit of a nightmare for the American people.
Are you concerned about Ukraine and Israel aid passing? Do you think it can get done before the end of the year?
It has to get done by the end of the year.
Will it?
I'm going to predict it will. Sometimes, in this business, I've learned that there are moments when you can't fail and you can't necessarily see the path to get there, but you get there. Ukraine is running out of bullets for their guns. Israel desperately needs our support right now. Republicans in the Senate have said that they want there to be some border provisions as part of this package to move forward. Some of us are trying to work hard to meet those Republican concerns. I don't know whether we'll get there, but there are a lot of people of goodwill trying hard to get money for Ukraine, for Israel. By the end of the year, I think it will get done.
All right, let's talk about what happened this week. Mixed results for Democrats. On the one hand, Democrats had a very strong election night on Tuesday. On the other hand, there were a slate of troubling poll numbers for President Biden, which showed him trailing former President Trump in key battleground states. One Democrat described that to me as a 5-alarm fire. Are you alarmed right now about the prospects of President Biden's reelection?
I'm actually not, because I don't see those as mixed results. We don't choose a president based upon public opinion polling a year out. What matters in this country is election day. And over again, when voters turn out in elections, they are choosing Democrats. Why? Because we're talking about things that matter to people. How much money are they making? How much are they paying? Republicans are focused on things that don't matter, regulating drag shows, trying to give guns back to criminals. These are things that fundamentally are completely divorced from where the American public are. And so I don't think these polls necessarily predict what the election a year from now is going to be. And I actually think when voters turn out to the polls, that's the sign of how strong the Democratic brand and President Biden's brand is today.
When I talk to Democrats, one of the things they're most concerned about is that these polls show President Biden losing support in key groups among voters of colors, young voters, union voters as well. How does he win back their support?
Well, continuing to talk about things that matter to those voters. Listen, I love President Biden taking a bold stand on the UAW strike. A lot of people, some of his advisors probably told him not to go out there and get in the middle of a labor strike. But he did, because he wants to show the American public, he wants to show middle-class voters that he is going to take the side of workers, not corporate America, every single time when there's a fight. I think he needs to do more of that.
Let's talk about Senator Joe Manchin. His announcement this week that he's not going to run for re-election makes it tougher for Democrats to hold on to the Senate. How concerned are you about Democrats holding on to the Senate? How concerned are you he is going to run as a third-party candidate?
I like Joe a lot. He's been really critical to many of the successes that we've had in the United States Senate over the last 2 years. I'm not terribly worried about him running as a third-party candidate. If he does, he probably draws more votes from Donald Trump than he does from Joe Biden. And, 2 years ago, people didn't think that we could hold the United States Senate. We had to, essentially draw an inside straight, win every single competitive race. But we did, in part because the Republican candidates were and still are wildly extreme. And our candidates were really excellent. And that dynamic is still in play in 2024.
All right, Senator Chris Murphy, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.